elevator doors that won't close, buttons lighting up in impossible sequences, a young woman stepping out, back in, hiding, as if someone is just out of frame. You've seen this clip 100 times, but tonight we're going to do what the internet didn't. We're going to grade every theory by evidence. No hype, no ghosts, no guesses. Welcome to Case First Channel, and this is Top 10 Elisa Lam Theories Ranked by Evidence. Here's how this works. For each theory, we'll ask 4 questions. What's the mechanism? What data supports it? What contradicts it? What remains unknown? Then we'll post a scorecard. Physical evidence, witness/record, plausibility, contradictions. If a theory can't survive those 4 rounds, it drops. If it does, it climbs. But before we start the countdown, freeze this moment in your mind. An elevator door that won't close. Buttons lighting up in impossible sequences. A young woman stepping out, back in, hiding, as if someone is just out of frame. You've seen this clip 100 times, but tonight, we're going to do what the internet didn't. We're going to grade every theory by evidence. No hype, no ghosts, no guesses. Welcome to Case First Channel, and this is Top 10 Elisa Lam Theories Ranked by Evidence. Internet myths thrive on fear. Evidence doesn't care about fear. So ask yourself right now, which theory do you want to be true? In which theory are you ready to accept if the facts point there? Some of the greatest hits you've heard will crumble in minutes. Some you wrote off as ridiculous might score higher than you expect. And one, just one, will emerge as the most consistent with everything we can verify. Keep your own score as we go. If our ranking beats yours, tell me why in the comments. If yours beats mine, show your work. This isn't a campfire story. This is a forensic audit of internet certainty. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. In the Elisa Lam case, every theory pays a price. If you claim elevator tampering, explain the control logic and the test results. If you claim foul play, show the entry, the exit, the trauma, the timeline. If you claim accident, solve the access problem and the tank logistics. If you claim negligence, map the alarms, the stairwells, the locks, the lapses. And if you claim the paranormal, explain why it only thrives where documentation goes dark. Some minutes from now, your favorite explanation might not be your favorite anymore. We're going to strip this down to what can be known and let the score decide. Ready? Theory number 10 is the loudest on the internet and the weakest on paper. Let's start the countdown. The first stop on our evidence scorecard is the internet's favorite suspect, the elevator itself. Because if you scroll through countless forums, Reddit threads, and YouTube theories, you'll notice one thing. People cannot stop replaying that elevator footage. It's haunting, it's glitchy, it doesn't feel right. And when things don't feel right, people assume someone made them wrong. The theory? Elisa's elevator was tampered with, either by a stalker, a hotel staff member, or some outside force trying to trap her. In short, she pressed the buttons, but the doors stayed open. Why? Because someone wanted them to. Sounds sinister, right? But let's test it. How would you tamper with an elevator? Elevators are not like door locks. You don't just jam a stick in the gears. They run on a system of relays and logic boards. To interfere, you'd need access to the control room, knowledge of the circuit board wiring, a reason to make it fail in the exact way it did. Elisa presses multiple buttons in the video, dozens of them even. Some floors light up, others don't. Then the doors refuse to shut for over a minute.
Could someone backstage, say in the hotel's service area, have manipulated the control system? Possibly, but that leads to a bigger question. Why risk exposure for a delay that doesn't guarantee anything? Here's where things get tricky. After the footage was released, elevator technicians actually reviewed it. And what they found wasn't sabotage, it was programming. The elevator had a door hold function. Pressing the door open button could lock the doors for up to 2 minutes. Elisa could have triggered this by accident. Suddenly, the mystery isn't about a human hand pulling strings, it's about software running as designed. That makes the footage creepy, yes, but not tampered. If the elevator was sabotage, why didn't the building's inspection reveal it? Hotels, especially large ones, have state compliance checks. No report of an electrical anomaly surfaced in the case file. No maintenance worker confessed. No guest lodged a complaint about stuck elevators that week. The footage itself doesn't show Elisa reacting like she's trapped by tech. She looks confused, yes. Distressed, yes. But she moves back and forth like someone waiting for the elevator to kick in, not like someone realizing they've been hacked. And yet, there's one detail theorists won't let go. After Elisa leaves the frame, the elevator suddenly starts moving again, like nothing was wrong. Why then? Why not doing the 90 seconds she was inside? Some argue this timing feels like a cue, like someone flipped the switch when she was gone. Others say it's just coincidence. So why does this theory still dominate TikTok clips and conspiracy posts? Because it feels cinematic. It looks like a horror movie. Elevator doors frozen open, a girl hiding from an invisible pursuer. And our brains prefer sinister explanations when the alternative is she pressed the wrong button at the wrong time. But evidence doesn't bend to cinema. And if we're playing by the rules of this countdown, theory number 10 doesn't just stumble, it collapses. Yet here's the thing. When you strip it away, you're left with something more chilling than sabotage. If the elevator wasn't trapping Elisa Lam, then what was she reacting to in that footage? Was it someone off screen? Was it a hallucination? Was it fear only she understood? And that brings us to our next theory, the one with a name as eerie as the footage itself. The Dark Water connection. Because while the internet obsessed over the elevator, locals in Los Angeles couldn't stop noticing a different connection. And once you hear it, you won't forget it. When Elisa Lam's story exploded online, one phrase became so viral that even people who didn't follow true crime started repeating it. Dark water. It's catchy, it's spooky, and most of all, it feels like something out of a horror novel. But this isn't fiction. This is one of the most bizarre real-life connections ever tied to a missing persons case. At the exact time Elisa Lam disappeared in Los Angeles, film buffs noticed something strange. A 2005 Japanese horror movie, later remade in Hollywood, had an almost identical storyline. Its title? Dark Water. In the film, a young girl drowns in a building's rooftop water tank. Soon after, tenants complain about foul-tasting tap water. The mother, investigating, finds her daughter's body inside the tank. Now, compare that to Elisa's real case. Elisa Lam disappeared. Guests at the Cecil Hotel began complaining that their water tasted odd, looked dark, and had a low pressure. Hotel staff investigated. Elisa's body was discovered floating inside the rooftop water tank. The overlap is so uncanny, it feels like plagiarism, but in reverse. A script written nearly a decade earlier seemed to predict Elisa's final resting place. Coincidence? Maybe. But for internet sleuths, it was enough to declare something darker. Was Elisa Lam's death staged to mimic the film?
It didn't stop there. The case had a chilling scientific twist. At the same time as Elisa's disappearance, health officials in Los Angeles were conducting a tuberculosis test near Skid Row, just blocks from the Cecil Hotel. The test kit? It bore the acronym LAM-ELISA. Yes, the victim's name, LAM-ELISA, was literally printed on tuberculosis test kits in that area. For conspiracy theorists, this wasn't random chance. This was code, a signal, proof that Elisa's disappearance was linked to government testing, bioexperiments, or worse. Think about the odds. A woman named Elisa Lam dies in a case involving water contamination, and a nearby TB test uses her exact name? Statistically improbable. Emotionally, downright terrifying.
Theories multiplied. Was Elisa Lam part of a secret study? Did someone silence her because she stumbled into restricted knowledge? Was the Cecil Hotel being used as a cover for experiments, with the rooftop tanks playing a role? The dark water theory ballooned into a rabbit hole. YouTube channels made millions of views connecting horror film clips to real-life CCTV footage. Reddit exploded with charts, timelines, and maps of coincidences. Even mainstream outlets couldn't ignore it. And in true internet fashion, the more eerie connections people found, the less anyone cared about whether those connections actually explained how Elisa Lam ended up in the water tank.
Let's strip the superstition. Film connection? Creepy, yes. But art imitates life, and water tanks on rooftops are a known feature in many cities. Just because a film writer used the idea doesn't mean they scripted Elisa's fate. TB test? Real. The LAM-ELISA test kit acronym was no hoax. But it's named after lipoarabinomannan enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, a medical mouthful shortened into something that just happened to echo Elisa Lam's name. A staggering coincidence, but coincidence nonetheless. Government experiment? No documents, no witnesses, no leaks have ever suggested Elisa Lam was targeted for research. So if the evidence is flimsy, why won't this theory die? Because humans hate randomness. If Elisa Lam's death was just a tragic accident, it's senseless. If it was scripted, if it was part of something bigger, then it feels explainable. We crave patterns, even if they're illusions. And in the Elisa Lam case, the dark water coincidences are irresistible. They give the story a mythic, almost supernatural weight. They make people whisper, "This couldn't just happen." But here's where things shift. If the elevator wasn't sabotaged, and if Elisa wasn't a pawn in a horror movie script, then what explains her behavior? Why was she gesturing at empty air in that footage? Why was she ducking in and out of the elevator like she was hiding from someone?
Theories about curses and coincidences might keep Reddit buzzing, but police reports point to something far more personal, something that lives inside the human mind. And it brings us to theory number 8, mental illness and medication. Because once you peel back the conspiracies, you find a trail of pharmacy bottles, incomplete dosages, and a haunting question. What happens when reality itself becomes unreliable? When investigators dug into Elisa Lam's past, they uncovered something that changed the tone of the entire case. Elisa wasn't just a 21-year-old student on a spontaneous trip to California. She was someone who had lived for years with bipolar disorder and depression. And with that came a history of medications, mood stabilizers, antidepressants, antipsychotics. The discovery reframed the mystery. Could Elisa's bizarre elevator behavior, her disappearance, and even her death in the water tank be explained not by murder, not by conspiracy, but by her own mind unraveling? Toxicology reports later revealed Elisa had taken some, but not all, of her prescribed medications. In her bloodstream, doctors found traces of antidepressants, traces of mood stabilizers, but strikingly low or missing levels of her antipsychotic drugs. This suggested Elisa may have skipped doses, and for someone with bipolar disorder, missing medication can trigger delusions, paranoia, or even full-blown psychosis. So when the world saw her pressing elevator buttons erratically, peering into the hallway, ducking as if hiding from something, was she hallucinating? Was she in the middle of a manic episode? Let's revisit that infamous tape with this in mind. Her hands flailing, making strange gestures. Could she have been speaking to an imagined figure? Her pacing, darting in and out. Could she have believed she was being followed when in reality no one was there? Her sudden calmness, then panic, then calmness again. Classic signs of psychosis, where perception shifts violently from one state to another. It paints a terrifyingly different picture. Not a woman stalked by a killer, not a victim of ritual sacrifice, but someone locked inside her own crumbling sense of reality. If Elisa had been in psychosis, it could explain how she ended up in the hotel's most restricted space. The rooftop of the Cecil wasn't meant to be accessible, but with determination, it wasn't impossible to reach. There were fire escapes, ladders, and unsecured paths staff later admitted weren't well monitored. Imagine Elisa, confused, convinced she was in danger, scrambling upward in the dead of night. For her, the rooftop might have felt like an escape, a safe place, or maybe even a destination only she understood. And the water tanks, massive and looming, could have seemed like shelter, a hiding place, or even, if delusion twisted her perception, something calling to her. And if she climbed inside, disoriented, unable to get out, the explanation, as grim as it is, might be tragically simple. This theory hits hard because it humanizes Elisa beyond the viral clips. She wasn't a horror character. She was a daughter, a sister, someone whose family had watched her wrestle with an unpredictable illness. In her online blog, Elisa herself wrote candidly about her struggles, feeling isolated, being overwhelmed at university, hiding her pain behind cheerful photos and words. Her posts reveal someone fragile yet brave, trying to make sense of a world that often felt heavier than she could carry. For her parents, The thought that her death could have been the result of untreated bipolar disorder, not foul play, was heartbreaking, because it meant she had been battling demons invisible to everyone else. But here's where things get tricky. Toxicology confirmed she had low levels of meds, but that alone doesn't prove psychosis. Missing 1 or 2 doses doesn't always trigger an episode. Sometimes it takes weeks, other times the symptoms hit fast. And then there's the physical puzzle. Even in a delusional state, how did Elisa manage to climb a 10-foot tank, open its heavy lid, and slip inside without leaving obvious signs of struggle? Skeptics argue psychosis explains her behavior, but not the logistics. If she was hallucinating, fine. But could hallucinations give her the strength to maneuver those tanks alone? That's where this theory begins to wobble. On one hand, the mental health theory is grounded. It uses science. It uses Elisa's medical history. It avoids paranormal shortcuts. For investigators, it's the most plausible explanation. On the other hand, it feels unsatisfying. Because if Elisa's death was simply the tragic culmination of untreated bipolar disorder, then the case isn't a mystery. It's a tragedy, a preventable one. And that doesn't sit well with the millions of people who've obsessed over the case online. They don't want an answer that feels mundane. They want shadowy figures, sinister cover-ups, something that makes the story as unforgettable as the footage. So while police leaned toward mental illness as the explanation, the internet revolted. Too easy, they said. Too neat. Too convenient. And maybe they were right.
But even as investigators lean toward this conclusion, one thing didn't add up. If Elisa's death was simply mental illness, why did the hotel resist, delay, and mishandle almost every step of the investigation? From the missing security footage, to the delayed police reports, to the chaos surrounding how her body was even found, suspicion shifted. Which leads to the most damning question of all. Was the Cecil Hotel itself covering something up? And that takes us to the next, the hotel conspiracy. For years, people have asked the same burning question. If Elisa Lam's death was truly an accident, then why does the Cecil Hotel look so guilty? Because from the very first hours of her disappearance, the hotel's actions didn't just raise eyebrows, they practically screamed cover-up. Let's rewind. Elisa was last seen on January 31st, 2013, but her body wasn't discovered until February 19th, 19 days later. Think about that. A major Los Angeles hotel with hundreds of guests, a missing woman, and yet no answers, no discoveries, and no resolution for almost 3 weeks. During those 19 days, the Cecil Hotel continued to check in guests, families, tourists, business travelers, all while Elisa's body was literally decomposing in a rooftop water tank, feeding the taps, showers, and drinking water. So how did management miss this? Or worse, did they already know? Then came the infamous video, the surveillance footage from inside the hotel elevator. It was released by the LAPD on February 13th, 2013, nearly 2 weeks after Elisa's disappearance. But when internet sleuths analyzed it frame by frame, they noticed something disturbing. The timestamps were missing. The footage seemed to be slowed down. And at one point, a whole minute of video appeared to be cut out. So who edited this footage? Why was it released incomplete? And what was the hotel trying to hide? If Elisa Lam's case was a tragedy of mental illness, why not show the full, uncut evidence? Why present the world with something doctored, something suspicious, something that fed theories of foul play? Adding to the mystery was the hotel staff's strange behavior. Employees admitted Elisa's belongings had been left untouched in a storage area, including her laptop. For days, no one had bothered to hand over these items to police or her family. The cruise director of a ship might dismiss concerns with cold indifference, but here, at the Cecil, managers seemed evasive, staff seemed inconsistent, and the overall vibe screamed negligence. Or worse, guests reported complaints about water pressure, about foul-tasting, dark water flowing from taps. And yet, for weeks, maintenance only offered vague excuses. No one thought to check the rooftop tanks until a guest insisted. When the truth came out, it was a nightmare. Elisa's body floating in the very water people had been drinking, bathing in, brushing their teeth with. And the hotel? Their response was almost robotic. No emotional statement, no apology, just logistics. As if this wasn't the first time the Cecil had been linked to death. And maybe that's the most chilling part of all, because the Cecil Hotel wasn't just a hotel. It was a monument to tragedy. For decades, it had been a haven for criminals, drug dealers, and the destitute. Serial killers like Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, had once called it home. Countless suicides had occurred within its walls. It was a building steeped in death. So when Elisa Lam disappeared, many argued the hotel wasn't shocked. They weren't scrambling. They were simply following the same pattern they had for decades. Downplay, deflect, and move on. But here's the conspiracy's sharpest edge: the roof. Hotel staff claimed the rooftop was locked and alarmed, that only employees had keys, that no guest could possibly access it without triggering security. So how did Elisa get there? Some argued she climbed the fire escape, but even then, how did she open the heavy tank lid? Some lids were reported to be bolted, others unsecured. Stories shifted, details contradicted each other. If the tanks were really that hard to access, then someone with authority, someone with keys, someone with knowledge could have escorted Elisa up there. But if that's true, then we're not talking about psychosis anymore. We're talking about an inside job. The hotel's excuses crumble further when you realize Elisa's body was only found because of guest complaints. Think about the optics. Police had searched the building with dogs. Helicopters had scanned the area. Yet somehow, the most obvious hiding place, the rooftop tanks, wasn't checked for nearly 3 weeks. Was that incompetence or intentional delay? Some believe the hotel dragged its feet deliberately, hoping Elisa's body would decompose enough to erase forensic evidence. That way, if she had been assaulted, drugged, or killed, it would be nearly impossible to prove. And sure enough, by the time her body was recovered, decomposition had destroyed most chances of definitive answers. Convenient for the hotel, devastating for the truth. Finally, there's the aftermath. The hotel rebranded. New names, new management, new image. They distanced themselves from Elisa Lam's death as quickly as possible, calling it a tragic accident, insisting it was beyond their control. But conspiracy theorists noticed every move the hotel made seemed designed not to find answers, but to bury them.
Even Netflix's documentary years later highlighted how evasive and tight-lipped the hotel had been. Almost as if deep down they knew something the rest of us never will. So was Elisa Lam's death the tragic result of mental illness, or was it something darker, a hotel complicit in hiding the truth, protecting its image at the cost of justice? But even the hotel conspiracy theory leaves gaps, because there are other explanations that stretch beyond human interference, theories that edge into the eerie, the supernatural, and the paranormal. And for some, those are the only explanations that truly make sense, which leads us to the next, the paranormal theories. Every crime story has facts, reports, timelines, evidence. But Elisa Lam's story? It comes with something extra. A shadow. A whisper. A weight so heavy that no autopsy or police file can explain it. Because for every person who believes Elisa's death was an accident, there are thousands who believe something else, something darker, dragged her to that rooftop water tank. Footage is the first nail in the coffin of logic. Elisa Lam in the elevator, pressing button after button, ducking out as though something unseen stalks her. To some, she's panicked, but to others, she looks like she's following rules. That's where the infamous elevator game comes in, a Korean urban legend. You press buttons in a certain order, and supposedly the elevator takes you somewhere else, another dimension. And in that place waits a woman in black. Look at her and you're doomed. Speak to her and she takes you with her. Now, rewatch Elisa's video in that light. The sequence of buttons, the way she steps aside, almost as if giving someone room to enter, the way her arms twist and her fingers flick, like she's signaling. Was she playing a game she'd read about online, or had she been dragged into something she didn't understand? Millions swear it looks less like panic and more like ritual. Then there's the building itself, the Cecil Hotel, a name that sounds more like a sentence than a safe haven. Serial killers Richard Ramirez and Jack Unterweger once lived there. Countless suicides happened inside its walls. People called it cursed long before Elisa arrived. Paranormal investigators claim the Cecil isn't just haunted, it's a magnet, a thin place where the barrier between worlds wears down like rotted fabric. Guests reported whispers in the night, shadows crossing rooms, elevators moving with no one inside. So maybe Elisa wasn't the first to feel the hotel's grip. Maybe she was just the latest victim, another name absorbed into its curse. And here's the detail that chills. Weeks after Elisa's death, visitors swore they saw a young woman's figure in mirrors, her silhouette flickering in security reflections, always near the elevators, always waiting. Some theorists take it a step further. Look again at Elisa's gestures, the twitch of her fingers, the strange rhythm of her steps, the sudden shift from fear to calm, as if someone flipped a switch. That behavior has been described before in accounts of possession. Victims suddenly animated, as though they're puppets being controlled. Elisa's own blog reveals her struggles with bipolar disorder. Skeptics point to that. But believers argue her mental state made her vulnerable, easy prey for forces that slip through cracks in the veil. The theory says Elisa didn't climb into the water tank willingly. She was led. And the Cecil, if you believe the legends, it's not just haunted, it's hunting. Now here's where things get even more disturbing. Days after Elisa's body was found, Los Angeles experienced a tuberculosis outbreak among the homeless population near the Cecil. The test kit used to track it, it was called LAM-ELISA. You heard right. The test name was a perfect mirror of hers. To doctors, it was random. To conspiracy theorists, it was too perfect to ignore. Her name, her death, tied to a disease outbreak at the very doorstep of the hotel. Coincidence? Or a signature from something playing a game far bigger than we understand? And then there's what happened after. Visitors to the Cecil swore they heard knocking from the locked water tank area, faucets turning on in the middle of the night. One guest said she woke to see a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed, a young woman with dark hair, watching, silent. Another claimed they heard laughter in the elevator, a soft, broken giggle that matched the exact voice Elisa's friends remembered. The strangest? A tourist recorded a video in her hotel room mirror. Behind her reflection, a second face flickered in the glass. When slowed down, the outline looked eerily like Elisa Lam. But here's the hook. And yet, that's exactly the problem. Because no camera has ever captured a ghost. No autopsy has ever logged possession as a cause of death. Which means these theories, as chilling as they are, leave us in the dark, staring at shadows, listening to whispers. And that brings us to the most painful, most controversial explanation of all, one rooted not in demons or curses, but in mental illness. Because what if Elisa Lam wasn't dragged into another dimension? What if she was dragged into the darkest corners of her own mind? For some, the answer is terrifying because it's supernatural. But for others, the truth is far more tragic and far more human. Because what if Elisa Lam wasn't stalked by demons, but by her own mind? Before her death, Elisa kept a blog, a raw, open window into her inner world. She wrote about books she loved, bands she listened to, and the thrill of discovering life as a young traveler. But she also wrote about her struggles. Elisa battled bipolar disorder, a condition that swings its victims between dizzying highs and crushing lows. She described days where she felt unstoppable, buzzing with energy, creativity, an almost electric spark that carried her through life. And then she described the crashes, the dark, heavy days where she couldn't leave bed, couldn't even move. Her blog entries weren't just casual reflections, they were warnings, silent alarms. And reading them today feels like staring into the diary of someone standing on the edge of a cliff. When the autopsy came back, it revealed something critical. Elisa's toxicology report showed traces of her prescribed medications, but not all of them were present in the amounts they should have been. To doctors, that suggested a chilling possibility. Elisa wasn't taking her medication as directed.
Now, combine that with the stress of travel, a new city, a notorious hotel, isolation. Her mind could have spiraled. Bipolar disorder doesn't just affect mood, it can alter perception. It can cause paranoia, hallucinations, even psychosis. Suddenly, the elevator video takes on a different tone. The frantic button pressing, the darting glances, the hand gestures that look like codes or spells. Were they the signs of a supernatural encounter? Or the desperate actions of a young woman gripped by a manic or psychotic episode? Investigators leaned heavily toward this explanation. Elisa's mental health could explain nearly every bizarre detail. Her elevator behavior? Delusions. Her rooftop access? A frantic attempt to escape imagined danger. Her climb into the tank? A confused, irrational act driven by panic or hallucination. And here's the hardest part. This explanation requires no conspiracies, no cover-ups, no curses, just the tragedy of a brilliant, kind, adventurous young woman whose illness overtook her at the worst possible time. But accepting that explanation doesn't ease the pain. Elisa's parents flew from Vancouver to Los Angeles, searching, pleading, demanding answers. To them, the mental health explanation felt like an insult, a dismissal. They knew their daughter's struggles, but they also knew her strength. She was careful, her father told reporters. She was responsible. She didn't just climb into a water tank. The family refused to believe Elisa's death was simply the result of untreated bipolar disorder. They pushed for accountability, for proof that something more sinister wasn't overlooked. And they weren't alone. Thousands of supporters online agreed. Because even if mental illness explained her behavior, it didn't explain the failures that followed. Here's the part that gnaws at everyone. How did Elisa even reach the rooftop? That door was supposed to be locked. Alarms were supposed to sound. Staff were supposed to respond. But none of that happened. For investigators, it suggested negligence. For her parents, it suggested liability. For conspiracy theorists, it suggested something darker. Maybe someone let her through. And that's the part the mental health theory can't touch. Yes, it may explain Elisa's behavior, but it doesn't explain the building's failures. But here's the twist, and that's the paradox of Elisa Lam's case. The mental health explanation might be the most rational, the cleanest, the one that ties up loose ends. But when people look into her eyes in that elevator video, they don't see mental illness. They see fear, urgency, a silent plea, as if she knew something we didn't. And if mental health was the cause, then we're left with a more haunting truth than any ghost story. That Elisa Lam might still be alive today if someone had just been watching, if someone had just locked the doors, if someone had just helped her. And that's why the story doesn't end here. Because if mental health is one theory, the next takes us into a different territory. A territory of cover-ups, of corporate neglect, of questions nobody at the Cecil Hotel seemed eager to answer. If the mental health theory explains Elisa Lam's actions, it doesn't explain the building.
It doesn't explain the system failures. And it definitely doesn't explain the silence that followed. Because when people looked closer at the Cecil Hotel, they didn't just see a tragic accident. They saw negligence, and possibly a cover-up. Investigators insisted Elisa accessed the roof by herself. But think about this. The rooftop door was supposed to be locked. If anyone opened it, an alarm should have echoed through the hotel's hallways. No alarm was ever reported. No staff came running. So how did Elisa get through? Two options exist. Either the system failed, or someone let her through. And neither answer brings comfort. The elevator footage of Elisa Lam is timestamped. But here's where things get strange. The timecode is blurred. The footage looks tampered with. A whole minute appears missing. A minute where Elisa may not have been alone. Why would hotel management release a clipped video? Why blur the timecode? They called it a technical glitch. But conspiracy theorists and even seasoned investigators saw it differently. They saw a deliberate edit, a choice to withhold evidence, which raises the most dangerous question of all. What did the Cecil Hotel not want us to see? Guests at the hotel reported foul-smelling, discolored water for days. Some even said it came out black. Management brushed it off, told people it was just Los Angeles plumbing. It wasn't. It was Elisa, her body decomposing in the very tanks that supplied the hotel. The timeline here is damning, because if guests complained for days, then management had multiple opportunities to investigate and save her. But they didn't. And when they finally checked, it was already too late. After Elisa's death, the Cecil Hotel went quiet. No emotional statements, no outreach to her family. Instead, lawyers stepped in. Their priority wasn't compassion, it was liability. In court, the hotel argued Elisa's death was her own doing. They claimed the hotel wasn't responsible because she had placed herself in danger. For the Lam family, this was salt in the wound. Their daughter vanished in a hotel with faulty security, broken locks, ignored alarms, and yet the blame was shifted back onto her. Here's where the case connects to another haunting tragedy, Amy Bradley, who vanished from a cruise ship in 1998. Her family begged the cruise director for help. They were dismissed, told she had probably just run off. By the time action was taken, it was too late. And Elisa Lam's case carries that same chilling echo. A vulnerable young woman, red flags ignored, management slow to respond, and a family left with nothing but grief. The Cecil Hotel isn't just another hotel. For nearly a century, it was infamous, a hub for crime, drugs, suicides. Even serial killers like Richard Ramirez called it home. To many, it was cursed. To others, it was simply negligent. Elevators that didn't work, doors that didn't lock, cameras that failed when needed most. The building itself seemed complicit in Elisa's fate. But here's the twist. If negligence explains Elisa's death, then someone should have been held accountable. But no one was.
No arrests, no firings, not even a fine that stuck. The Cecil went on. Guests checked in the next day. Life continued as if nothing had happened. And that's where suspicion grows. Because if Elisa Lam's death really was preventable, then allowing it to fade into history benefits only one side, the hotel. And yet this still doesn't silence the other side of the debate. Because negligence alone doesn't explain the elevator footage. It doesn't explain the missing time. It doesn't explain the hand gestures that looked like she was signaling someone just out of frame. For that, we have to turn to the darkest theory of them all. The one people whisper about in forums. The one the internet can't let go of. Not negligence, not mental illness, not even paranormal, but murder.
Imagine this. You're in downtown Los Angeles. It's 2013. You're a 21-year-old student exploring a foreign city on your own. You've got a diary, a camera, and a restless sense of adventure. You're staying at the Cecil Hotel, not the Ritz, but it fits your budget. You check into a place that has a history darker than most true crime documentaries can fit into 2 hours. And somewhere in the maze of its cracked hallways, malfunctioning elevators, and fire escape ladders, someone notices you. This is the foul play theory, that Elisa Lam didn't climb into the tank herself, that she didn't simply wander into danger, but that someone, a stalker, a predator, a guest, maybe even an employee, saw her, followed her, and ended her story. Why people believe this theory? Let's rewind to the infamous elevator video. The way Elisa presses multiple buttons, the way she peeks out into the hallway, then ducks back inside, the way she moves her arms in what almost looks like a defensive gesture. If you've ever watched someone play hide and seek with danger, it feels eerily familiar. Some viewers are convinced Elisa wasn't acting strange at all. She was hiding from someone off camera. Then there's the missing 1 minute of elevator footage. CCTV experts confirmed it wasn't just a glitch. Parts of the footage had been edited. But why? Who edited it? And what was on that cut? A shadow? A second figure? A detail that didn't fit the narrative? Now add the hotel staff factor. The Cecil wasn't exactly hiring the cream of the crop. Reports of shady tenants, drifters, and even violent offenders blending in with guests were all too common. The idea that a hotel employee with keys and rooftop access might have lured Elisa to her death is more plausible than people like to admit. The stalker guest theory. Elisa was young, approachable, and often posted about her life online. Could someone have tracked her down through her Tumblr? Maybe a fellow guest became obsessed, followed her movements, and took advantage of the chaos inside the Cecil. A worker could have easily accessed the rooftop. The locked doors? A joke if you had a key. The tanks? Known to staff who maintain them. It would explain how Elisa ended up in such an inaccessible place. Suppose Elisa had an altercation with someone, staff, guest, or even security. The hotel, already infamous, couldn't risk more bad press. If a crime happened, concealing it as an accident might have felt like damage control. But here's where the foul play theory wobbles. There were no defensive wounds on Elisa's body, no signs of struggle. Toxicology didn't show drugs in her system, and the idea that someone could lift Elisa's body, climb a ladder, open a heavy water tank lid, and dispose of her without leaving a shred of evidence, it's a lot to ask. Then there's the timeline.
Elisa was missing for 19 days before her body was found. Could a predator really sit back and watch police dogs, news vans, and maintenance staff all search the building, knowing what was inside that water tank? Unless that person was confident the rooftop would never be checked. Or worse, confident no one would ever care. This is the strongest non-accidental theory. It makes sense emotionally, it makes sense visually, and it fits the narrative of the Cecil Hotel's dark reputation. But without evidence, without fingerprints, DNA, or witnesses, it remains a chilling what if.
The moment the elevator footage of Elisa Lam hit the internet, it spread like wildfire. Millions of people around the world became armchair detectives overnight. Reddit threads lit up, YouTube channels dissected every frame, and Twitter timelines overflowed with theories. But here's the dark twist. The search for answers didn't just focus on Elisa. It turned on innocent bystanders. Within weeks of Elisa's death, internet sleuths dug up a chilling video on YouTube. It was from a little-known death metal musician named Morbid, real name Pablo Vergara. In one of his music videos, he wandered through a hotel, sang about death, and wore dark makeup. That was all it took. Commenters flooded his page, accusing him of being the killer. They pointed out that he had stayed at the Cecil Hotel years earlier. They linked his lyrics to Elisa's fate. This is a confession, they said. Case closed. The only problem? He was in Mexico at the time of Elisa's disappearance, hundreds of miles away. Morbid's life collapsed under the weight of accusations. Death threats poured in. He was vilified across the globe for a crime he never committed. Then came Elisa's own Tumblr page, which remained active for years after her death. People pored over her posts, looking for clues. Some thought scheduled posts meant she had survived longer than police said. Others thought her photos hinted at hidden enemies. In truth, it was just Tumblr's Q feature at work. But the internet refused to let it go. The hunt for answers turned into a hunt for someone, anyone to blame. The internet witch hunt theory doesn't explain Elisa's death, but it does explain how unsolved mysteries mutate in the digital age. Instead of evidence, people chase vibes. Instead of suspects, they destroy lives. It reminds us of something vital. Once the internet decides you're guilty, facts no longer matter. This wasn't evidence, it was scapegoating. A tragic reminder that sometimes the search for truth becomes its own kind of cruelty. The Cecil Hotel had external fire escapes running up its sides, ladders and stairwells that bypassed locked doors. Guests, urban explorers, and even photographers later demonstrated that anyone could reach the rooftop without triggering alarms. For Elisa, who may have been distressed or confused, climbing the fire escape
could have felt like an escape from perceived danger. Reports about the water tank lids were inconsistent. Some accounts said they were locked or bolted. Others claimed they were heavy but left unsecured. Photographs from later inspections showed lids propped open for maintenance. If Elisa reached the roof and found an unlocked or poorly secured tank, curiosity or desperation might have led her inside. This theory doesn't require foul play, conspiracy, or supernatural forces. It simply points to unsafe building practices. Rooftop locked doors that were bypassable. Alarm systems that didn't function. Water tanks without proper safety barriers. In other words, Elisa may not have been targeted. She may have been failed by the building itself.
Later lawsuits filed by Elisa's family argued exactly this. The hotel had a duty of care and failed to secure dangerous areas. Urban explorers on YouTube have since shown how easily the rooftop can be reached. No evidence of tampering or struggle was found, aligning with an accidental entry more than foul play.
This case leaves behind more questions than answers. What's the one message you believe Elisa's story should remind the world about? Drop it in the comments. Your perspective might be the one that stays with someone else.